Every empire begins with a story, and every freedom ends when someone else writes yours. If this truth unsettles you, it should. Stay with me until the end, because a colonizing of story isn't just about history, it's about you, your mind, and the invisible empires living inside your imagination. Subscribe now for more stories that question everything you've been told, because the next revolution won't be fought with weapons, it will be fought with words. Once upon a time, before the first empire was carved into maps and before nations were names, there was only story. Story was the first colonizer, the first conqueror of minds. Before swords or ships, there were tales told around fire, myths whispered into the ears of children who would grow to believe that the land beneath them and the sky above them belonged to something larger, something divine, something they could never question. Story shaped gods and governments, carved borders in belief long before they were drawn in blood. It taught people what to fear and what to love, who to serve and who to despise, who was us, and who was them. And so, long before empires rose, stories conquered. The greatest empires didn't begin with armies, they began with authors. Every tyrant was once a storyteller. Every colonizer learned that if you own the narrative, you don't need to chain the body, you only need to capture the mind. Words can do what weapons never could. They make the enslaved grateful for their chains. In the beginning, it was simple. The powerful wrote myths that served their own existence. They called them sacred texts, histories, traditions. They said the gods had spoken, but it was their own voices echoing through the temples. Those who listened learned to obey, and those who questioned were labeled heretics, traitors, savages. The colonization of land came later, the colonization of imagination came first. That is the secret no history book will tell you. The first conquest is always the story. When the explorers left their shores in search of gold, they carried not just guns and flags, they carried words. They carried language, translation, doctrine. They carried discovery, a word so heavy with power that it erased entire civilizations by naming them found. The people who lived in jungles and deserts and mountains didn't know they were lost until someone else told their story. To be colonized is to be renamed, to be rewritten. The missionaries built churches, but more importantly, they built narratives. They told the children that their gods were wrong, that their mothers' songs were pagan, that their dances were devilish, that their names were shameful. They replaced sacred fires with crosses and called it salvation. They replaced drums with bells and called it civilization. They replaced stories with silence and called it education. And the silence grew so deep that generations forgot what their grandmother's laughter sounded like. The colonization of story isn't only about whose story gets told, it's about whose story is erased. Whole languages disappeared, whole mythologies were buried, whole cosmologies were laughed into extinction. And yet, even as stories died, the colonizers' myths thrived. They were printed, translated, taught, televised, streamed. And so the empire of story grew until it reached every corner of the earth. But colonization didn't end when the maps stopped changing. It only evolved. Today, the new empires don't wear crowns or uniforms, they wear logos. They colonize not continents but attention. The new colonizers are algorithms, and they too tell stories. They tell you what's trending, what's true, what's worth your outrage, what's worth your love. They write your beliefs in invisible ink on the glass of your phone screen. You scroll, you read, you repost, and you think you're free, but you are inside a story someone else wrote. You are the character who doesn't know they're being written. You are the audience clapping for your own manipulation. The story colonizes you by making you think it's your choice. You didn't choose your opinions. They were delivered to you in carefully curated sentences, disguised as facts. You didn't choose your heroes. They were designed for you, branded, sold, marketed. You didn't choose your villains. They were scripted by those who profit from fear. Every time you pick a side, someone somewhere is counting the money you just gave them through your attention. That's the new empire of story. Soft, invisible, global. No ships, no soldiers, no borders. Only narratives. The colonization of story works because humans are addicted to meaning. We can't bear chaos, so we invent order. We can't bear uncertainty, so we invent certainty. We tell stories to make the unbearable beautiful, to give our suffering a shape. But the danger begins when the storytellers stop telling truth and start selling belief. The colonizers of old claimed they brought enlightenment. The colonizers of today claim they bring information. Both are lies told beautifully. Truth doesn't need a sales pitch, but stories do. That's how they win. They seduce you with emotion and drown you in simplicity. They tell you who the enemy is so you never look in the mirror. They give you a hero to worship so you never become one yourself. And little by little, your imagination, your greatest territory, is conquered. You begin to think in borrowed sentences, dream in branded colors, fear in mass-produced shapes. The stories colonize your language, and once they own your words, they own your thoughts. Orwell wasn't writing fiction, he was warning us. And yet, here we are, willingly uploading our consciousness into systems designed to script us. But let's go back. Before the algorithms, before the media empires, before Hollywood or textbooks, what was the pure story? The first stories were sacred, not because they were true but because they were shared. They belonged to everyone. They were told around firelight, with breath and wonder. They connected generations, explained storms and stars, made grief bearable, and hope tangible. They didn't seek power, they sought understanding. But somewhere along the way, storytelling was weaponized. It became a tool to divide, to rule, to sell. The storytellers became servants of the powerful, and the powerful became the gods of the new myths. The modern storytellers, advertisers, politicians, filmmakers, influencers, are not very different from the priests of ancient temples. They, too, perform rituals of persuasion. They, too, baptize you in belief. The only difference is that now, the altar fits in your pocket. The liturgy scrolls endlessly. The prayers come in pixels. You don't kneel, you swipe. But the faith is the same, the faith that what you see is real. Somewhere inside every human being, there's a battle between the colonized story and the original voice. The colonized story tells you who you are supposed to be. It says, be successful, be perfect, be productive, be popular. It says, you are only valuable if you are seen. It says, buy this, post that, follow them. It replaces authenticity with algorithm. But the original voice whispers something softer, something older. It says, remember. Remember who you were before someone told you who to be. Remember the story your body still carries, the rhythm in your blood, the ancestors in your bones. The colonization of story is not irreversible, but you must first notice it. You must see the cage before you can leave it. The cage is made of words, and the key is also made of words. You free yourself by telling your own story. That's the rebellion. Creating new myths, writing new truths, refusing to be scripted. The colonizers can own the platforms, but they can never own your imagination if you choose to reclaim it. Every generation gets the stories it deserves, and the ones it resists. The world is drowning in noise because silence has become dangerous. Everyone is telling stories now, but few are listening. The tragedy of our age isn't that stories are dying, it's that they are being mass-produced. The sacred has become content. The myth has become marketing. The truth has become entertainment. And yet, in this chaos, there's still hope. Because even within colonized spaces, resistance blooms. A poet in a war zone. A filmmaker banned in their own country. A child writing their truth in a language their school forbids. A grandmother teaching forbidden songs to her grandchildren. These are acts of decolonization, not of land, but of spirit. Each story told in defiance of silence is a seed. It grows in the cracks of empire. It blooms in forbidden soil. It whispers that not all stories can be bought, not all minds can be programmed, not all hearts can be colonized. The danger today is subtle. The colonizers have learned to smile. They speak of diversity while selling uniformity. They sell freedom wrapped in data collection. They sell self-expression through products that make everyone look the same. They tell you to find your voice, while feeding you templates. The empire of story has learned to disguise control as choice. But there are still those who remember. There are still storytellers who don't write for profit or applause, but for survival. They know that storytelling is not entertainment, it's oxygen. They know that every time they write or speak, they reclaim a piece of the stolen sky. Because to tell a story in your own words, in your own voice, is to take back territory. The colonization of story ends not with a revolution, but with a whisper. A whisper that says, "This is mine." So what now? How do we unlearn the colonized stories? It begins with questioning everything you believe. Who taught you your idea of beauty, success, love, morality? Where did your story come from? Whose benefit does it serve? To decolonize your story, you must become uncomfortable. You must confront the versions of yourself that were written by others. You must be willing to erase and rewrite, to remember and unlearn. It will feel like death, because it is, the death of illusion. But on the other side of that death is truth, raw and alive. That's where your real story begins. And when you tell it, it will not sound like anything you've heard before. It will be messy and magnificent, trembling and real. It will not trend, but it will transform. It will not go viral, but it will heal. Because real stories don't conquer, they connect. Perhaps, in the end, that's the only antidote to colonization: connection. When stories are shared, not sold. When they are used to heal, not to rule. When they remind us that we are not separate but interwoven. The colonizers of story want you isolated because community is power. The moment you gather, listen, and tell your truth together, the empire trembles. Because no system can survive a people who remember who they are. That's why the first act of colonization is always to divide. The first act of freedom is always to unite. And the bridge between the two is story. So write, speak, sing, record, reclaim. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for perfection. The empire is built on your silence. Break it. Your story is not small. Your story is not secondary. It is the front line of liberation. You were born into a world already written, but you do not have to stay in the script. You can pick up the pen. You can write your own mythology. You can unlearn their language and create your own. You can refuse the roles of victim or villain and write yourself as human, fully, fiercely, freely. That's the revolution no power can stop. The colonizers can erase your history, but they can never erase your imagination. They can silence your tongue, but they can never silence your thought. They can burn your books, but they can never burn your truth. Because truth is oxygen, it finds a way. Every time someone tells their story honestly, the empire cracks a little more. And one day, when enough people speak, the cracks will become light. So remember this: the story that controls you is only as strong as your belief in it. The moment you question it, it begins to lose power. The moment you tell a new one, you become free. The colonization of story began with the first lie told beautifully. It will end with the first truth told bravely. And maybe that truth is this: no one can own your story but you. If this story stirred something inside you, if you felt the tug of recognition, the spark of rebellion, or the hunger to reclaim your own voice, then don't just scroll away. You are part of this movement now. Tell your story, share it, write it, speak it, pass it on. Subscribe for more truths that dare to challenge the noise, and let's build a world where stories don't conquer, they connect. The next empire won't be built on power. It will be built on people who remember how to feel.